At some point in your life, you might have heard the phrase, "You can do anything you put your mind to." But if we took that literally, just how far can we go? What if we could one day have the technology to literally move objects with our minds? This is the fabled idea of telekinesis, an idea once only limited to the sphere of psychic mysticism. There's also the idea of telepathy. Could we one day have the technology to read each other's minds? In some sense, our minds already kind of do both of those things. It's just a matter of how effectively they can do them. First, we discovered fire and developed oral communication. Then we turned oral language into writing. And from then on, we found a way to turn that into the printing press. After a few centuries, we happened upon this thing called electricity, which gave rise to telephones, radios, TVs, and eventually, the computer I'm using right now, gradually increasing the bandwidth of mind-to-mind communication. But now, we have a new technology that could reduce this bandwidth even further, the BCI, or Brain-Computer Interface, which holds the ambitious promise of letting your brain communicate directly with the internet. BCIs could very well be the key to making things like telepathy and telekinesis a reality. BCIs are no longer science fiction. There are interfaces out there right now that'll actually let you play the game Pong using only your mind. BCIs are quickly becoming a household name, allowing disabled patients to control their prosthetic limbs and sensory bionics. In fact, some BCIs can now perform real-time speech decoding, translating our brainwaves into written or spoken language. And we've started using them to communicate with people who have severe neurodegenerative disorders. For example, researchers from Stanford University have now built a BCI that lets paralyzed people literally type with their brains, using nothing but electrode arrays implanted into their motor cortex. In the study, researchers asked 3 patients with Lou Gehrig's disease to imagine the hand movements that they'd use to write any letter of the alphabet. They then had the BCI transmit the desire to write any specific letter into a series of digital signals so that the computer could type the letter for them. One of the patients was able to type 39 correct intended characters, which is about 8 words per minute, all without using autocomplete or spell check. We've also begun to develop BCIs that let our brains talk directly to these computers, which could open the door to even higher ambitions, like mind uploads or human immortality. And of course, I'm talking about neural lace, which appears to be Silicon Valley's next big obsession. Neural lace is a term coined by the famous sci-fi author Ian Banks, defined as a device that allows brain-to-brain communication between any 2 humans, or between humans and AI. It's usually described as a kind of net, with thousands or even millions of electrodes, communicating with the neurons to let us upload or download thoughts from the internet. And there are now 3 big tech entrepreneurs who are trying to make it a reality. Braintree founder Brian Johnson and his company Kernel. Mark Zuckerberg with the B8 neuroprosthetic. And of course, Elon Musk with his famous new company, Neuralink. All 3 of them are trying to develop this neural lace technology for real, and they all have one very strange reason for doing so: to prevent an AI takeover by simply merging with the AI. Because if we can't beat them, then we might as well join them. This motive isn't as crazy as you might think. We already live in a world where artificial intelligence has begun to exceed the human capacity for learning. So to avoid a fatal outcome, they're trying to cultivate a technology where we can interact as naturally with our machines as we do with each other. The first of these projects is Kernel, a new company started by Brian Johnson, with the lofty goal of turning the brain into a custom programmable device. Johnson sold his first company, Braintree, to PayPal for over $800 million, and he's now investing $100 million of that into Kernel's new BCI project, a technology he calls a neuroprosthesis, a series of microelectronic devices and non-invasive surgeries that could better interconnect our machines to individual neural pathways. The end goal of this neuroprosthesis is a kind of enhanced intelligence, where by understanding our neural code, we'll be able to interface with artificial intelligence, and download its programs directly into our minds. It sounds pretty ambitious, but if you reconsider the human body as simply just a device capable of inputting, processing, and outputting information, then it turns out that the weakest part of that device is its bandwidth, the speed or rate that we take in data. Even with present-day technology like smartphones, we humans still possess a very low bandwidth, along with very inefficient user interfaces. However, Kernel is looking to create implantable brain chips with sensory augmentations that could expand that bandwidth, and begin the first step for our partnership with AI. This brain chip technology is based on the work of Dr. Theodore Berger, a professor of neuroscience at the Center for Neural Engineering in the University of Southern California. Johnson's device is actually based off 15 years of academic research, pioneered by DARPA and the NIH. However, Kernel still has yet to produce any human trials with these brain chips, so only time will tell if they can deliver on these ambitions. Next, there's Facebook's B8 neuroprosthetic, which has now also joined the neurotech arms race, with the intent of creating the very first website experience centered around BCI. Last year, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg announced that the company was beginning work on a new BCI that would let users type simply by imagining the words. The new device is being developed in collaboration with UC San Francisco, which has recently made headlines for demonstrating the ability to read minds through MRI. In preliminary experiments, the researchers asked participants questions and then recorded their brain activity while they gave the answers. Using high-density electrocorticographic monitors, the BCI was eventually able to learn which words the patients were thinking of, with an accuracy rate as high as 61%. Former executive for DARPA, Regina Dugan, now a member of Facebook's Advanced Projects division, claims that the B8 neuroprosthetic will allow us to type 5 times faster than we naturally do with our motor neurons. The next step of the B8 neuroprosthetic is to eventually build what Zuckerberg calls a brain mouse, a neural interface that will let the user connect to Facebook's augmented reality feature, bringing social media even more closer to our personal lives than it already is. There will be obvious benefits to this, like a world where we can connect more personally using virtual spaces, despite geographic constraints and physical limitations. It actually sounds pretty great, if it weren't for the fact that Facebook sucks, but I digress. The big deal breaker here for many people is that the Zuck will not only be able to access our personal information through our websites, but now also from our brain. Speaking of which, millions of Americans have already left the social network in 2018, so we can't quite assume that Facebook will be around long enough to actually apply this technology. Lastly, there's Neuralink, started by notorious Tony Stark wannabe, Elon Musk, who at this point needs no introduction. Musk originally decided to create Neuralink after having raised $27 million to help treat stroke and brain lesions. After 2 years of secrecy, Neuralink has finally revealed its operations to the public last month, with a live-streamed presentation detailing its strategy to connect the human brain to machines. Essentially, Musk's Neural Lace project is intended to be a kind of mesh of electronic fibers, wirelessly transmitting signals from neurons into a computer, basically making human beings themselves an extension of the cloud. Neuralink's presentation included top scientists from the company going into great detail about the system, planning to install the BCI by literally shooting holes in your skull with lasers and then sealing it back up again. Through these holes, electrodes will be inserted into the brain to direct the neural signals zooming around our head. Each electrode must be at least 60 microns away from the neuron to detect its firing. So clearly, this tech is going to be incredibly invasive. Just invasive enough to tap into the synaptic junctions between our neurons, and then translate that data into computer bits, which will then be picked up by a device behind the ear called the N1 chip. The N1 chip transposes analog data into codes of ones and zeros, using filaments about 4 to 6 micrometers in diameter, each one connected to 3,072 electrodes. To insert these filaments, Neuralink scientists will be using a remotely operated neurosurgery robot, which can insert about 6 threads per minute. So far, all of Neuralink's technology has only been tested in lab rats, but human trials for the FDA are already lined up for 2020. So in comparison to Zuckerberg and Johnson, Neuralink's prospects are actually looking pretty good. The first application of this technology will be to help people with disabilities. However, it definitely has some untold potential in other areas as well. The idea of writing and sending text using just your thoughts is already mind-blowing enough. But I think the potential of this technology goes way beyond that. One big field of potential is universal human consciousness, which we sort of have already with the internet, but the current bandwidth is very slow, and we have a lot more information out there than our brains could possibly take in a whole lifetime. But the high bandwidth of neural lace would allow for wireless transmission of all that information up into the cloud, and perhaps other people could download that content for educational purposes.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
In fact, the resulting overload of information could accelerate the rate of communication between humanity so exponentially that it could bring about vertical curves in every possible graph indicating human progress. It seems that the next phase of the internet will be BrainNet, where we won't only send words and images, but also emotions and feelings. If successful, Neuralink could create a world of extreme empathy, letting us communicate our thoughts, fears, hopes, and anxieties, all without demeaning ourselves through written or spoken language. Another potential application of this technology is next-generation adaptable gaming. In fact, the games of the future will probably never feel repetitive ever again. When it comes to games, players often tend to get accustomed to certain patterns. However, new smart games, integrated with our neural lace, could respond to what your brain is feeling in real time, always staying one step ahead of your expectations. The games of the future will respond to our emotions as we're feeling them, making it much easier to frighten, surprise, or amaze us. There's actually an episode of Black Mirror called Playtest, where a game tester seems to be trying a BCI-based game, complete with enemies that materialize from their worst fears, like spiders. Much of the artificial intelligence that we're developing has already shown itself to be just as creative as a human composer, so these kinds of experiences could actually be right around the corner. But the biggest application of this technology will be taking the very first step to transferring the human mind into mechanical bodies. Specifically, a type of android we call a surrogate. The name being inspired by that famous sci-fi movie with Bruce Willis. Surrogates combined with neural lace would effectively let us perform dangerous tasks with zero risk to the operator. There's actually an entire field of engineering called telerobotics, which is focused on human pilots interfacing with machines to do things like cleaning up nuclear waste, constructing habitats on Mars, or even performing surgery from halfway around the world. If anything, neural lace is the technology that's going to make all this happen. Dare I say it, we might even use this technology to modify our brains and eliminate all suffering. And when I say that, I don't just mean digital orgasm analogs or hedonistic virtual drugs. I'm talking about the elimination of existential suffering as well. It's all very interesting, but will developing these devices really be a good idea in the first place?
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
First off, implanting electrodes into a healthy brain might just be too high of a risk to ever be approved by the FDA. While many Parkinson's patients already receive very similar treatments, it doesn't mean that it's ethical to put perfectly healthy people in danger. We could severely be damaging our memories, personality, or even consciousness itself. Secondly, what is all this technology going to mean for privacy? Are corporations going to start beaming advertisements into our heads while we sleep? And if so, then will we have a neurotech version of AdBlock? Mark Zuckerberg has already started stealing our personal data from our online profiles. So now the big question is, if Elon Musk is going to start doing the same, literally stealing the memories from our brains. Third, there's the question of hackers. Will people start downloading viruses into your head, just as they do to your laptop? You can't just go to the Apple Store and get a new brain. You only ever have one, so what happens if the data gets corrupted? Fourth, exactly how are the majority of people going to be paying for all this? Will 99% of humanity have to go into endless debt just to afford one? What if Neuralink could literally disable your brain if you don't pay your bills on time? Overall, I still don't quite know how to feel about this technology, but I am absolutely certain about one thing. The fact that Elon Musk will either be remembered as the great savior of humanity, or its downfall. Ultimately though, we might not have any choice but to try it out. In his recent appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast, Musk has a very negative view regarding recent developments in AI, suggesting that one day, artificial intelligence will be able to upgrade itself faster than its human programmers can. This is what's called an intelligence explosion, meaning it could lead to the very extinction of life on this planet as we know it.
It could be terrible, and it could be great. It's not clear.
Right.
But one thing is for sure, we will not control it.
AI is already beating us at poker. It's beating us at Go. In fact, we've even built an AI that can build other AIs. It can drive our cars, do our taxes, and eventually, it's going to leave us behind, which may result in it seeing us as pets, or even worse, as pests. Because our connection to the machines that we build is severely limited by our keyboards and screens. So we can never really tell what it's thinking about, especially when it's thinking about killing us. There might come a time where AI will be learning so fast that we'll become to it what ants are to us. Perhaps it might even murder us if we're in the way. So regardless of how we feel about neural lace technology, we'll eventually have to adopt it for our own good, whether it's in 10 years or in 100 years. If we want to stay alive in this world, we're going to have to make ourselves inseparable from the AI that we're constructing. Just as mitochondrial bacteria made itself inseparable from the eukaryotic cells that consumed it. We're going to need some way to digitize our minds so that we can enter AI's thoughts, and hopefully get the software updates every time machine learning enters a new breakthrough. However, this technology would work both ways, meaning that the AI would also be allowed to see our thoughts as well, learning our morals, our values, and our way of thinking, becoming more like us as we're becoming more like it. It sounds pretty scary, but it's definitely good news. Because if we can understand it, and it can understand us, then there essentially won't ever be a need for conflict. If information is able to flow seamlessly between AI and our brains, then we might even become symbiotic with AI, perhaps even sharing its superhuman cognition. According to Musk himself, neural lace will be the next inevitable step in human evolution. There is a certain degree of truth to this. Our brain is made up of several layers that correspond to different periods of life on this planet. First we had the brainstem, or lizard brain, which controls basic bodily functions. Then we developed the limbic system, or mammalian brain, which controls emotion and survival mechanisms. And finally, we developed the cortex, the rational part of the brain that makes conscious decisions related to space and time. Elon describes the neural lace as just another layer of this process. It's really just the next chapter in a story that's already been going on for billions of years. In conclusion, there are many social implications for this technology that we haven't even begun to imagine, so it's best that we start asking questions early and continue asking them often. Because if we don't, then we might find the answers to those questions taking us by surprise. With BCIs and neural lace, it's not difficult to imagine a post-human future in which a complete merger of man and machine is possible. You might be quick to think that this is a dystopian technology, but for the first person to fall into a fire pit, so was fire. It's also easy to be cynical about neural lace ever becoming widespread. But sometimes, you just get a technology that's so compelling that can't simply be dismissed as a fad. And I think neural lace is one such technology. It could very well be the next big turning point in the evolution of our species. It could certainly be the way that humanity will level up, so to speak. It promises nothing less than to make us geniuses, help us defeat AI, and even grant us immortality. Because with BCIs, you can do anything you put your mind to.